Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser here with our Friday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone is doing well and looking forward to a great weekend. We're getting a little break in the weather. The next few days are only supposed to be in the upper 80s. I know that's hot, but compared to what we've had, that's a break in the weather. I know myself, I do a lot of outdoor exercising, and especially if you go later in the day, like 5 o'clock or so, it's definitely not nearly as humid and debilitating. But anyway, you should still stay hydrated. Today's real estate tidbits, I'm going to go over a lot of kind of where the trends are. I'll give some data again, and then I'm also going to go over some real life experience. So I think the combination of those two should prove quite informative and interesting for you. I did want to sneak in a little promo for my sports podcast. As you may have mentioned, we had been promoting that on our previous real estate tidbits, that we were going to start a sports podcast on Tuesdays. So we did record our first episode this past Tuesday. Unfortunately, we ran into some technical difficulties, and more importantly, after I did some additional research, I found out that somebody else had the name that we were using for our sports podcast. So we've ironed out the technical difficulty, so if you do happen to be looking for it, it's on all the major portals as of now, and we've renamed this show to Marty K's Sports Takes. Unfiltered sports takes. And so I think you'll find it hopefully informative. I'm going to inject some humor into it and, of course, opinionated. So I'd like to get everybody's feedback on that. So for those of you that do listen to the sports podcast, let me know what you think. So getting back to real estate, let's start off with a quick update in Hunters Creek. I always like to include that on our podcast. So Hunters Creek actually had a slight decrease in properties for sale this past week. I don't think it was a trend or anything. It was just one of those weeks. So as of this morning, we have 45 properties for sale in Hunters Creek that are single-family homes. They're ranging in asking price from $385 to $875. Overall, the amount of houses going under contract and the traffic has been normal. The real estate market right now is kind of unpredictable due to a lot of the outside circumstances, which I'll go into as we get into the podcast. One thing I'm curious about in Hunters Creek, usually around the 3rd or 4th of the month, I do a study of the how many closings we had. So in this case, we're talking about how many closings we'll end up having in July of 2026. And then I compare that to 2025. That's something that I do every month, and it gives me a barometer for year-to-date business. So I'll be curious to see how July 2026 compares to last year. And I'll let you guys know on our next podcast. So that's all about Hunters Creek data. The next thing I wanted to go over is a little bit about mortgages and monetary policy. For those of you that follow that, there was a lot of buildup to the Fed's latest meeting. So they met this past week. And, of course, they're under new leadership because they made a change at the top. The previous Fed director, his term ran out, and President Trump, for his own reasons, didn't care for the previous gentleman, so he appointed a new person to be the head of the Federal Reserve. So I'll read you a press release that they had 2 days ago, and I think you'll find it interesting. They've made the following decisions on their monetary policy. They voted to maintain the interest rate paid on reserve balances at 3.65%. Now, that basically just means the Federal Reserve rate with their member banking institutions. But that's usually a big benchmark for how that's going to affect, how their policies are going to affect what I call the economy, and more importantly, for the purposes of folks listening to this, how they're going to affect real estate rates. So basically what they have said is they they wanted to undertake their open market operations to maintain the federal funds rate in a range of 3.5 to 3.75. And they're also going to, meet again in a month or so to see if they're going to make any changes. And one thing that was interesting, they had a 9-3 vote to maintain it the same way, but excuse me, but it wasn't a unanimous vote. So they had 3 people that voted against the policy, and they actually wanted to raise the target rate for the federal funds rate by 0.25%. So what does that mean? Well, besides it not being unanimous, it lends itself to possibly seeing an increase in the rate just because the 3 dissenters wanted to raise it. And there's conflicting opinions as to which direction they should go. I know President Trump is wanting them to lower the interest rates, especially for mortgages. But there's a lot of contrary data to that with all the instability in the war effort in Iran, the continual rise in oil prices, inflation's rearing its ugly head. And it's just definitely more costly for Americans this year than it was prior to the Iranian conflict. And so normally, if you just based it on that data, they would have raised interest rates. But right now they wanted to keep them stable because it's a fine juggling act on how they're going to maintain our economy. The interesting thing and kind of what's a positive thing is our economic benchmarks over the past month or so have stayed pretty solid. So we haven't really seen any major downturns at this point. So we're kind of keeping our fingers crossed. There's a lot of what I would call erratic things going on. The only thing I would say from my personal opinion in terms of how I think this could affect the economy and society in a macro sense is that I don't see that we have any good solutions in Iran. I think whatever happens is not going to be a good thing. And so it's a question of picking out the lesser of the multiple negative ramifications. And the reason I say that is because regardless of what solution we have, the only benefit to whatever we come up with is that hopefully there'll be some kind of more permanent direction, and maybe it'll cure a lot of the nervousness that people have. But think about your own situation and think about the Iranian conflict and kind of meld them together. We hear different news on the Iranian conflict every day or two. The war efforts between us and Iran, some days will be moderate and other days they'll be significantly increased. We're still having problems with the oil flow through the Strait of Hormuz. Economically, we're still fighting inflation somewhat. We're still fighting oil prices increasing. We're still fighting day-to-day grocery store prices increasing. When you go out to eat, it's more expensive. People are a little bit more concerned about their jobs in certain industry. There's a lot of differing opinions on how AI is going to affect not only society, but the job market. So there's just a lot of conflicting things that are causing a great percentage of our population unease. The flip side of that is what I tell my customers. If you think you're in a pretty stable job situation and you're serious about doing something in real estate, whether you're thinking of purchasing, whether you're thinking of buying an investment property, or whether you're thinking of selling a property, all things being equal, I recommend that you go ahead with it because there's definitely no clear trends that interest rates are going to go down in the near future. And so there's really no benefit from that standpoint to wait. And I don't think you're going to see supply or demand dramatically change. Right now, we're kind of in a flat market. Depending on what part of the country you're in, it varies a little bit. But there's really not any major discernible trend changes. So I think it really depends on your personal situation. Like I was on an appointment this past Wednesday with a couple that wants to sell a property. And they asked me several different times in different ways, did I think they should wait? What's the best time of the year to sell? And, what did I think would be in their best interest? And I basically gave them as honest an answer as I could. And I said that I didn't really see a big difference between if they sold their house now or if they waited a few months. I said that it really depends on their comfort level. Now, with this family situation, they were going to be selling a property for in the lower 300s and buying a higher priced property. So I explained to them that because they're buying a higher priced property, a lot of these changes are actually going to benefit them, because even if interest rates go, let's say they go up or there's price deviations, whatever, they're going to be penalized less on a less expensive property than buying a more expensive property. And if anything, any volatility would affect higher priced properties more than lesser priced properties. So in either event, they would benefit somewhat financially. But I did explain to them it's really what they're most comfortable with. I gave them a few maintenance suggestions to maximize the way their house is going to present. But I said, from my perspective, I could get started tomorrow. But I gave them recommendation that I thought they should analyze exactly the information that I left them, give some personal thought to what's going to make them more comfortable, and then let me know which direction they wanted to go, and I would do my best to maximize their situation. And I always try to give advice to people based on their individual situation. So now I wanted to slightly transition to the Florida real estate market. And I'll give you a couple components of forecast and what we're currently experiencing. Basically, in August of 26, we're continuing to normalize into a balanced into a balanced buyer's market, meaning that buyers are still slightly in the driver's seat, but the inventory has been pretty balanced. Some areas are getting a little bit more of a rising inventory than they are buyer activity, but it's really not overwhelmingly favoring one side. Statewide, we're starting to just see a very minimal dip in the statewide median prices and slightly longer days on the market. Statewide median prices have really, over the past year, have only changed 1% to 2%. The most challenging market, which doesn't affect us in Orlando, is especially the condo market in South Florida. That's definitely at its weakest point in a long time. And so if you're a buyer of a condo in South Florida, in most cases, you should be negotiating very aggressively, because the buyers are a lot more on the offensive and the sellers are a lot more on the defensive. We still always in the summertime, and we're starting to get to the back half of summer now. Historically, that's a busier time in Florida, because you have school starting the middle of August, and a lot of the migration from other climates or other parts of the United States tends to happen more in the spring and summer. It's been a little less pronounced this year, in large measure due to the Iranian conflict, because that was something totally unexpected that's been extremely volatile and stressful for a lot of people. So that's a little bit about trends in the Florida area. In my own opinion, I would still say that the Orlando, Central Florida market is probably the most stable and least volatile part of Florida. And so that's kind of my opinion on that. In terms of affordability, one thing that I find interesting, the median price, depending on where you're looking, is somewhere in the low 400s to around the 440 mark. I think that the last statistic I gave you guys last week was around the 425 to 430 mark for median prices. So, for example, to comfortably afford a $400,000 house, you would need a household income of between $90,000 and $135,000. And the reason that there's a little bit of variation, that depends on four factors: your down payment, what type of interest rate, of course, you're getting, the taxes for a particular property that you're looking at, and last but not least, what type of monthly debts do you have that are going to show up on a credit report? Someone with a high car payment versus someone with no car payment is going to be able to qualify for a higher priced home. And so when you're getting ready to look at homes, you always want to keep that in mind, that you want to keep your consumer debt that's going to show up on a credit report down to a minimum, and not take on any new debt that you can definitely avoid. Some of the what we call the modest or lowest priced areas in Florida right now are Ocala, Pensacola, and Gainesville. And again, they don't really impact Orlando that much. Up and coming areas, which are continuing to have above average growth, in Central Florida in particular, you're going to find that is two areas: the Lake Nona area and the Horizon West area, which is in the southwest of Orange County and primarily consists of Winter Garden. So that gives you a little insight into Florida and, of course, how the Central Florida area is doing. Another couple things that I thought would be of interest is, what kind of factors are going to affect how successfully your house sells besides pricing. So when I price a home, I look at a few aspects. Number one, the proximity to busy roads, commercial properties. Those are factors that are going to somewhat limit the price that I suggest to you. On the other hand, if you have a premium lot location, no rear neighbors, you're overlooking woods or, of course, water, that's going to increase the value of your home. What are some things that you should not do before you sell a home? Well, the number one thing is you need to avoid overpricing the home. And you always hear me harp on this, and this is more important than ever. And some of the things that you should do, you should make sure that your house is pristine in terms of its cleaning. You should try to minimize any obvious cosmetic negative things. But what you don't want to do is you don't want to start significant, major, expensive renovations, because they're just not going to be cost effective if you're getting ready to sell the house right away. So these are just some of the things. You want to eliminate odors in a house. You want to minimize personal items. And most importantly, I think from a staging standpoint, you need to eliminate clutter. You need to clear out your closet space, things of that nature. Now, getting back to price for a second, I wanted to go over a personal experience that I recently had with a new customer of mine. They had their house for sale previously with a different agency. It was on the market for 6 months, and it didn't sell. So they asked me to come in and sell their house for them. And so they have what I call it a normal house. When I say a normal house, you divide houses into three categories. Premium houses that have a lot of upgrades, a premium lot location. Those houses are still selling tremendously well. They're getting very solid prices, and they typically should be selling and do sell rapidly. Then you have the third tier, which are distressed properties. Either the properties are in rough shape, the people can't afford to maintain them, or the people are running into some financial problems where they need to sell their house. So those are going to, of course, if those houses sell, they're going to sell for a below market rate. And then you have the typical houses, which have pluses, but also have some minuses. Obviously, the pluses vary depending on what neighborhood it's in, what updates have been put in and what updates haven't put in, what's the age of the roof, what's the age of the air conditioner, is it a more popular floor plan, or is it a floor plan that some people don't like? Maybe it's a house that's more choppy. Maybe it has, in some cases, all the bedrooms upstairs. Different things that people find appealing or unappealing. And those account for about 70% of the homes. So, it's the majority of homes. It's similar to kind of our political climate. You have about 70% of people that are moderate, whether they're moderate liberals or moderate conservatives. You have 15% of the people on either side of that spectrum. 15% are a lot more progressive, and then 15% are a lot more conservative. Unfortunately, the 70% that are moderate, they're not really getting their viewpoints heard as much by our politicians, because the more extreme people seem to yell the loudest and create the most attention. So the personal home that I was talking about, of that 70%, when I did price it on the market, I explained the criticality of pricing along with the other variables that I went over. And so the house has been on the market for about 10 to 14 days, and our traffic has been a little bit less than I would like. And I refreshed and sent this particular customer all the data and gave the customer my opinion as to what I thought should be done. And I did recommend a quick price adjustment. Now, keep in mind on this house, when they had it for sale with their previous company, I had lowered the price a pretty decent amount. I lowered it about 6% from what it was on the market at previous. But I did tell them at that time it was still a premium price, so I always carefully evaluate the first 10 to 14 days. And anyway, so I advised them accordingly that I thought we should adjust the price again. And at this point, they're choosing not to do that. So I respect their opinion. It's their house. They have to do what they feel is best, and I did share that with the customer. I did reiterate after they told me they didn't want to lower their price again, all the reasons why I respectfully disagreed with them. I explained anecdotal evidence of my experience in that, especially if houses don't sell in their first 60 days, when they ultimately sell, they tend to sell for less than they would have sold for had they been priced more aggressively when the house first went on the market. And most buyers, when they see a house that is not sold in a certain amount of time, or a house has been for sale more than one occasion, they tend to assume, rightly or wrongly, that there might be something amiss with that house, and that impacts them lowering their price. So that's why I'm a strong advocate, especially in today's market, which is a little bit more unpredictable, to be a lot more price conscious when you're a seller. But of course, everybody wants to maximize their equity in their house, and some people are just a little bit more resistant to that type of pricing strategy. But if I could give people one piece of advice, It's properly pricing the home. Follow a skilled realtor's recommendation who's got a track record and gives you a lot of data, not just come in off their hip pocket and give you a price, but you need to have a lot of data and a lot of logic behind your recommendation. A lot of realtors are scared to tell people the frank and truthful data, but as you know from listening to me, I try to tell it like it is, and I'm not going to shy away from telling people what I feel is in their best interest, even if they're not always going to agree with me. So that's a little bit about that, and so we'll keep a close eye on that. I did want to share another story with you, and that's to do with home inspections. So again, this is one of my listings. We recently put the house under contract, and we had a home inspection, and the home inspection was somewhat couched in a negative fashion. It addressed, from the inspector's point of view, some significant issues that they found. And while I didn't disagree with the inspector's findings, I thought that their language could have been phrased in a more positive manner. One thing I find with inspectors, and this varies from inspector to inspector, is how they explain things to their customers. Inspectors' jobs are to find fault with homes, and most homes are going to find some type of fault. Some houses have more faults than others, but a lot of it's what I refer to as bedside manner. It's like if you go to a physician and you have an ailment, one doctor can say, yeah, you have this problem, but not to worry, we have this medication that's going to control this problem, and it's not going to be something that's going to adversely affect your life or quality of life. Other doctors are going to make it sound like it's a lot more dramatic, and they're going to make it sound like you're 2 steps away from your deathbed. So I'm using that as a little extreme example, but I've seen inspectors who are deal killers, and I've seen inspectors that do a great job of finding faults, but explaining them in a pragmatic, reasonable fashion. And that's a huge thing. The inspection industry, to a large degree, there's a lot of inspectors, and they're regulated, but they're not really regulated to the degree a lot of other professions are. Real estate agents are much more regulated than home inspectors, for example. And so they can really, they can create a lot of problems in a transaction. At the same token, when I'm speaking with sellers, I try to have them be as truthful as possible on their seller disclosure. This particular house, the sellers overlooked a couple of things. I don't think they did it on purpose, but they just didn't share it with me. And then when I was reviewing the inspection with the sellers, they kind of shared with me, well, yeah, they did have an issue with that, but they thought they had taken care of it. So I don't think they were doing anything to be dishonest because they thought they had taken care of with it. But I think if it had been disclosed to me, I might have recommended a little different course of action before we put the house on the market. But nonetheless, I was able to overcome all this conflicting information because, some jobs are more challenging than others on real estate. And like I always tell some sellers I do 5 times the work that I did on another transaction. So the transaction that I did less work, some sellers may think that, gee, I made a lot of money and the deal went like clockwork, which is what I try to do, of course, because I want to make it smooth and stress-free for everybody. On the other hand, the transaction that took 5 times as much work, I had to do that to make sure the deal closed. And again, that's my job. Now, I don't go back to that person and say I should charge more. But I know in the scheme of things, I'm going to put a lot of extra effort in on some deals, and some deals I'm going to get fortunate, and they're going to run a lot more according to the way a perfect scenario would be. So that's a little bit about the real estate market, about the national perspective, and about the local Florida perspective. The national perspective truly varies from region to region. So you just have to look at whatever market you're in. And so fortunately, we're in Florida, and compared to a lot of states, Florida is a lot more solid than a lot of other parts of the country. So that's all for today. Again, remember if you're a sports fan or like listening to Marty Kaiser, please listen to my Marty K's sports podcast that just aired. It's up there, and it's on all the major portals, and I think you're going to find it a good listen. And again, our Real Estate Tidbits podcast, which is every Friday, and our Sports Tidbits podcast is every Tuesday. So stay hydrated, stay safe, have a great weekend. This is Marty Kaiser out.